Now to the war in Ukraine, and as the country awaits a response from the European Union on its candidate status, Ukraine's president is bracing for intensifying fighting from Russia. It's something he says his country is preparing for, but he did warn that other European countries could also become targets of Russian attacks. And as David Biller reports from Lviv, Russia and Ukraine could be in for a long war ahead.
Rudabeh, the fighting in eastern Ukraine is still raging. The governor of Luhansk province said there are round-the-clock air reconnaissance missions by the Russians in Severodonetsk, allowing them to adjust their fire and be more precise with their artillery. They're still pummeling the city there. We've heard that Russians are shooting 10 times more artillery than the Ukrainians there. They did hit the Azot chemical plant twice. This is where both soldiers and civilians are sheltering at the moment. There is a slight shift from the governor of the province. He said that evacuation from Severodonetsk is now possible. We're not really clear how exactly that's possible. He has said that wasn't the case in prior days. There's still roughly 10,000 people trapped in the city. But the UK Defense Ministry said that the Russians are shelling that city to the north, to the east, to the south. What we're seeing across the country is this really grinding, slow war with artillery. And that being the case, we saw NATO's Secretary General Stoltenberg say that in comments published in a German newspaper today that people should be prepared for this war to last years. Rudabeh, back to you.
Thank you. And joining us tonight to break down tonight's developments in Ukraine is retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton. Thanks for being here. Nice to see you. The NATO chief warning that this war could go on for years. Do you agree with that?
Good evening, Rudabeh. I do. My concern is now that we're reaching somewhat of a culminating point here where you've got Russian forces are digging in effectively in the Donbass region in the east. Ukraine is somewhat stalled in terms of trying to push them out and so forth. As we see here on the screen, the NATO Secretary General is warning NATO and really the world that this conflict could last for years. And I agree with that. And that's where you end up having a war of attrition where, both sides are really just battling it down and they're just digging in their heels, and it could last for a long time. Years is a very long period of time, but I think certainly well beyond months and certainly well into 2023, perhaps even 24.
What stage of the war, what phase of the war are we in right now? You say your sense is that it might be the most dangerous point yet. Why do you say that?
Well, I say that because there are now very high-end military capabilities on both sides. The Russians are demonstrating very precise, high, long-range capabilities with their artillery and to some success with their air power. Ukraine, however, is still being able to be very nimble in the field, and they're able to even take tracked vehicles and assault the Russian forces that are dug in. So it's a point. My point about it being a very dangerous point is that you could come to a position on the battlefield where there's not a whole lot of progress, and you'll have force-on-force attacks. You'll have high losses, both in equipment and in people and so forth. And so that's why it's reached a very dangerous point. The last point I would raise on that, Rudabeh, is it's a very effective fighting season right now. It's in the summer. There's weather's relatively good. Forces are able to be in tracked vehicles, especially, and air power is able to use good ground as well as good weather to affect conditions in the battlefield.
Is Russia gaining ground, do you think? And is Ukraine's resistance as strong as we thought it was, or as it once was?
Well, Ukraine's resistance remains strong. Certainly their will remains very strong because it's their nation that's been invaded. Russia, however, has made, again, some very good gains, as we see in the eastern part of the right-hand side of that map that's in front of us right now. In the Donbass region, trying to create that land bridge into Crimea. That may have been one of the goals for Putin, rather than trying to take over the entire Ukraine nation, but to effectively take control of the Donbass region, that eastern part of Russia, and then that creates a land bridge into the south there, into Crimea and so forth, and into the Black Sea. So it will be determined. Now, President Zelensky has said he will not negotiate, nor will he provide any type of, again, giving up in any manner that eastern part of Ukraine. And so he's in it for politically, certainly the long fight as well. That's why we're at a very dangerous, tenuous point, both in terms of the battlefield, but also diplomatically, as well as what's happening around the world in terms of economics. We've got potentially a recession on the horizon and so forth. That's why the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who recently visited President Zelensky, says, warning us not to get complacent about this. We've got to continue to support Ukraine. Putin cannot succeed in Ukraine.
Well, do you think the U.S. and NATO and the West as a whole is starting to lose interest, at least interest in providing material and financial support, given, the financial situation, a possible pending recession as this war drags on?
No, I don't think so. And last week, President Biden authorized another $1 billion of aid to the Ukrainian military. And so I think the United States is in this for the long haul. My point about the complacency piece, and perhaps what Prime Minister Johnson was alluding to, is that we can't get complacent from this point moving forward. And so you have the Secretary General of the of NATO, and you've got Prime Minister Johnson and so forth, again, trying to keep the NATO alliance together in the free world in support of Ukraine so that we don't put our foot off the gas, if you will. We keep providing them arms, because the $1 billion that President Biden provided is principally in coastal defenses and heavy artillery and ammunitions and so forth. But that's going to run out in the next month or two. We're going to need to continue these, providing these weapons and making sure that Ukraine has everything it can to do on the battlefield so that they can not only stave off any type of Russian counteroffensive, but hopefully push Russia out of Donbass region. It's a hard task, by the way, but that's how President Zelensky has defined victory. And we need to support him in every possible manner we can to do just that.
And what about the sanctions piece of this? It might be hurting the Russian oligarchs and Putin and the country as a whole financially, but in terms of Russians' support for Putin, it seems to be having the opposite effect.
Well, I think, and I've talked about this on many occasions, the sanctions are now just beginning to have an impact. And so we need to play that out or see how that plays out over the next month or two in terms of the severity of the sanctions on the impact of the Russian economy, and therefore on the morale, not only of the military, but also of the everyday Russian citizen. Now, Putin controls all of that. It is it's a Russian old Soviet-like state that he controls. But at some point, the Russian people, I think, will begin to become fed up, and Putin will know that. But still, he holds all the cards, not only in terms of the Russian people, but certainly the Russian military, and right now, certainly in the Donbass region.
And British officials said just this week that morale on both sides is suffering, that both armies are seeing desertions. Is that something that's normal? Is that to be expected?
Well, that's what you can expect in a war of attrition that we may see starting to unfold right now. One thing we don't really know, though, we don't really have all the details, certainly not in the public, but even in terms of our intelligence, of really what is the state of the Ukrainian military? What is the state of the Russian military? What are truly those losses, both in killed in action and wounded? We really don't know those numbers, but we can presume on both sides that they've been significant. That's more of an issue, I think, with Ukraine because they're limited in terms of their manpower. Russia is not. Russia, although they still haven't gone to that strict draft and conscript, they still have more resources in terms of combat fighting forces and so forth. But nonetheless, that's where this war of attrition could tip in the scale towards Russia because they have more resources, almost unlimited resources, to fight that long war of attrition, as the Secretary General, again, of NATO alluded to.
And it drags on. Lieutenant General Richard Newton, thank you.
Thank you, Ruta Bay.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.